Hello, everyone, and welcome to Utah Growth Operators, a special series of the Execution Gap podcast. I'm your host, Jim Apodaca, president and founder of Apodaca Consulting. In this series, we sit down with leaders shaping the next chapter of Utah's growth. The operators building companies, leading teams, and navigating what changes as organizations scale. These conversations explore the realities of leadership as complexity increases, what works, what breaks, and what it takes to build something that lasts. And today I'm joined by Sean McClaugherty. Sean is a seasoned product and digital leader with over 20 years of experience operating at the intersection of business strategy, technology, and customer experience. Sean has helped build and scale platforms and teams here in Utah, including a $900 million dropship program with Overstock.com and growing e-commerce at Sportsman's Warehouse from approximately 20 million to over 280 million in annual revenue. Sean is someone who has consistently operated in complex environments, aligning teams, building systems, and driving meaningful outcomes. Sean, welcome to Utah Growth Operators.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, excited to have you on the show, Sean. But before we jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and kind of how your journey to where you are today?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think you framed it up pretty well, but I'm a digital and product operator. I've spent most of my career inside complex growing businesses, which has always been fun. Um, you know, Also comes with it a lot of challenges, the challenges not necessarily being the ideas of the business or what we're trying to accomplish, but more around the alignment and execution to actually grow the business. So, as you mentioned, I've had the opportunity in my career to grow and scale e-commerce and marketplace platforms from, the dropship program. It's Overstock.com that you mentioned, as well as, leading digital and e-commerce at Sportsman's Warehouse, most recently to a $283 million digital business. Um, what I've learned along the way is that growth doesn't just come from the technology, right? It comes from people, systems, and aligned priorities, right? Driving outcomes and, working towards common goals. And that's really what I love to do, and the work that really seems to resonate with me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, awesome, awesome. And kind of want to double click on some of that, right? I mean, you've been a part of multiple organizations. I mean, we talked about it. Overstock, you helped develop that $900 million dropship program. Sportsman's Warehouse helped them scale from 20 million to over 280 million. And I guess my question to you is, what's the moment when a company really starts to feel different? When does complexity start to show up? And what changes first? Is it the people, systems? Decision making? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think it changes the moment that coordination across teams and priorities and shared outcomes becomes more difficult for the company than the actual execution. A lot of times executing isn't the problem. You got a lot of people, smart people doing great things, doing smart things, not always in alignment though. It's easier at early stage, right? So, if I look back on my time when I joined Overstock pre-IPO, right? Call it 50 million sales, early stage, we were moving fast, right? Speed kind of superseded and structure. It was like, and I still look at this as a leadership lesson. I still say it to my teams now. For proactive people who want to get something done, all they have to do is look around and find something on the floor to pick up and drive value. So early stage, it's just everybody's moving quickly, right? As companies start to migrate into growth stage, then it becomes a lot more dependencies, especially cross-functionally, across the stack, across every component of the business. It just gets more complex. And so what ends up happening at that stage is you start to get fragmentation in decision making, right? So leaders start competing with decisions, and what the company's mission really is at its core starts to become cloudy, and that's when things get difficult.
Yeah, no, 100%, and I mean I've been fortunate, and I say fortunate to experience it, right? I mean, because when you are going through a growth stage, company like that, it's you're wearing many different hats, right? And that agility starts to fade, right? You're not as agile as you used to be, I mean, because you've added headcount, you've added processes, you've added, so much, and that's part of growth and scale, I mean, but it's I don't know, it's something that I've enjoyed being a part of, it's controlled chaos is kind of a good way to look at it.
It is for sure. I mean, controlled chaos is a great way to say it. What ends up happening is, you got a lot of people doing a lot of things, all with great intentions. But what ends up happening and what you realize is, doing more isn't always necessarily doing better, right? It's about operating differently. It's about coming together with shared purpose. It's about, building high performing teams, that feel purpose, and that's where you start to get scale.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And couldn't agree more, Sean. Couldn't agree more. You're preaching to the choir. Yeah, and so want to talk a little bit about a leadership alignment. You wrote a post on LinkedIn recently about where you commented that getting leadership teams aligned on the problem and the metric is the hardest part of digital transformation. And my question to you is, why is that so difficult in practice? I mean, what typically breaks down? What's your experience with that?
Well, again, I spoke to it a little bit already, but it really comes down to a misalignment in the truth, right? What's the truth? And uh, becoming clear on exactly what the truth is can be difficult. So you have, again, a lot of leaders and all smart people all pushing towards different objectives, right? So within a retail organization, you might have, your marketing team driving for traffic and acquisition. You've got your merchandising team trying to build out the assortment. You've got your ops teams trying to manage costs. Your product team is working on building out the experience. And then, underpinning all of it is finance driving for, profitability. And all of these things matter. But oftentimes what happens is you get, different groups driving their top KPIs and not necessarily in alignment with the company's top KPIs. So it can be really difficult getting, even people who are like-minded and who genuinely care about the success of the company, willing to sacrifice, certain of their own teams or their own organization's agenda to really get to the crux of what the real problem is. And that's kind of what the idea of that post was. That's the hardest part of digital transformation is it takes discipline. It takes a sort of selfless leadership team to come together and really see the true problem in the company and sort of selflessly um, aligned to uh, what the real objective of the company is, even if that objective could make a certain department's KPI look worse in the short term. That's the challenge, right? Is agreeing to what that problem is. Again, a lot of times it can be hard to see what the real truth is, and that's difficult as well. So it takes a lot of spirited debate, but also selfless debate and uh, true teamwork to come together and agree to what the problem is and align their teams, their activities, and their objectives accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big thing I heard there was discipline, right? It's, discipline is one of those things that's tough in organizations sometimes, I mean, I've worked with clients that don't have an annual, leadership planning cadence, and when you ask them about, well, what are the goals for, for the year, and what does your planning cycle look like? Oftentimes that's something that organizations aren't doing, and again, it's the discipline that goes into that makes that North Star possible, and so it's always interesting to me, like I say, when I work with organizations where the discipline and cadence of planning and communicating and, key metrics and really creating that alignment is unfortunately it's not there.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes companies will understand the North Star. They might understand the key problem. They might even be able to define simply what the problem is. Um, but oftentimes agreeing to the measurement, right? One North Star metric um, to really drive the problem that's facing the company now is the tougher part. So it's like we know what the problem is. We can agree that, some problem is the thing that we want to get after. But then agreeing to how to measure it and how to hold teams accountable cross-functionally is where things can break down, right? So OKRs and other frameworks like that are ways to measure that. And a lot of companies have been really successful in that, and others struggle to agree to how to measure it cross-functionally.
Yeah.
And that's where things can break down. So it's not necessarily, getting consensus, right? Among the teams. It's more about uh, creating shared accountability for the outcomes.
100%, 100%. And you talk about OKRs, and I've seen OKRs work well in many organizations, but I've also seen them fail in organizations as well, and it's one of those frameworks that it's a powerful framework if you do have the discipline that comes along with it, but also if you have the change management that comes along with rolling out a framework like that as part of digital transformation. I've seen it with organizations where they invest a lot of time into rolling out OKRs, but without that change management, without, helping the organization understand the why and understanding how roles and responsibilities are changing, how we measure success, what it means to the individual contributor. Oftentimes when that's missing, it's just another thing that we have to do, and it's unfortunate because again, it's a very powerful framework.
It is. I mean, and it's powerful and it works and it's been shown to work in a lot of companies. And other companies have found their ways without more structured frameworks like that. And that works too. It's really what about adapting to what works for the company. But what really matters when you strip it all back, you have to think about it from a human perspective, right? We're all people just working towards, trying to make whatever it is we're doing better. We all have a lot of different ideas and a lot of different ways of coming at things. And again, all generally informed, people who really understand the business, people who are smart, people who have, the background professionally or the educational credentials to bring something to the table, right? That's not the issue. It's more around figuring out how to get all those smart people to row in unison and come together as a team and not work against each other, right? Not, let's work really hard towards the common mission, not so hard, really kind of rowing against each other.
Yeah.
I've seen it a lot of times where teams are rowing really hard in opposite directions, and it's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of care. It's not a lack of purpose around the mission. It's more around, getting people to come together. That's what really matters. And that can be the difficult thing. That's where the magic happens in leadership. That's where, people uh, can be inspirational leaders, right? And for me, I really look at trying to simplify that in the context of storytelling, right? So we as human beings really love an epic saga, right? If you think about all the great stories of our time, right? Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, these amazing epic stories, really kind of have, a clear sort of three-act progression that happens. And I think in digital transformation, turnaround, The key to getting the team on board is to really tell a clear story. And you talked a second ago about line level operators, right? That are trying to carry out the mission. They need to understand it. They need to believe it. They need to feel it in their heart, and they've got to be bought into it. Otherwise, it won't work. And so how do you do that? Really, it comes down to leadership telling a clear story, making it very simple what the objectives are. Like, we talked about a North Star metric, but, 1 to 3 key things we're trying to accomplish over some period of time, right? So, call it a 3-year cycle. So we get our sort of epic start, middle, and finish. But if you can break it down that simply, especially companies at scale coming into turnaround, it's not something that's going to happen in 1 year. It's likely going to be 3 years plus for that turnaround to be successful. But it's about getting very super crystal clear from the beginning, sort of what that story is over 3 years. The KPIs can sort of shift year to year, but the real objective of the turnaround has to be clearly stated from the beginning. And then you have to constantly tell the story. It takes people, and a lot of times I think senior leaders forget that they know the details way better than the line level operators, and it takes time for those details, that clarity, even as clear as you think it is, to propagate down through the teams to where people can clearly state the message as easily at the line level as they can at the senior leadership level. That just takes repetition. You just got to be doing the reps. It's constantly reinforcing the mission as part of your weekly team reviews. It's constantly reinforcing the mission and where we are in the progress of that mission in, the highest level sort of company all hands. It's always got to be reiterated, always restated, and it's got to be sort of rooted in storytelling. And I talk about this a lot. It's a key component of leadership. It's a key component of product. It's a key component of any aspect of business. I think a lot of times people leave the storytelling to the marketers, but the reality is it's everybody's responsibility in leadership to tell the story and tell it consistently and not expect that people are going to get it in a handful of times. You've got to beat the drum consistently, and you got to keep people informed on where we are in the story.
Amen. And I love the storytelling piece of it because you're so right, I mean, and you do have to consistently tell that story. You do, that's part of connecting, with the company mission and what it is that we're trying to achieve. And that North Star is constantly hearing that story, and sometimes people get tired of hearing it, but you know what? If they get tired of hearing it, they're hearing it, And so I love that storytelling piece.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. And so kind of building on that, the last time you and I spoke, you previously mentioned something that stood out. You mentioned, you said, Jim, I'm a builder. And my question to you is, when did you first realize that about yourself? And what does that actually mean to you? What does it mean to be for Sean to be a builder?
Yeah, I don't know that there was any moment where I woke up one morning and said, I'm a builder. I think it's been, I think what you're sort of referencing around things you've heard me say or post on LinkedIn around, being a builder is something, it's a realization that's kind of come to me over time, as I get 20 plus years into my career and I look at the things I was doing before my career, the pattern starts to emerge. The types of companies and the types of problems that I've been, fortunate to be involved with helping to solve. You start to see the pattern emerge, and that's really where it comes from, But as I think about it and I think about my story, I realized I was a builder, before business, before I had a career, before any of that, going back early into, just my childhood even has just naturally been something that I've always done. So as I reflect on kind of my life and my path and my journey and all the things that I've had, the fortunate opportunity to be a part of it just starts to resonate that, yeah, throughout time, I've, just been fortunate enough to be involved with building cool things.
Well, and to kind of touch on that, I mean, before your career, right? You were building something very different. You were building a band, a scene, a network, right? And I guess my question to you is, how did that shape how you think about building today? I mean, how does that show up in the way you build your teams, systems, processes? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, um, it really comes down to meaning less about title. It's about creating momentum where it doesn't exist, right? So I grew up, in the hardcore punk community, here in Salt Lake City, and everything that I know about leadership really started there. Um, I didn't realize it until later, and like I started to be able to draw the connections and sort of the through line of all of that. But it really started there. In underground music communities like punk and hardcore, nobody's really in charge. It's just a lot of people that have a shared interest in a thing that resonates with them, and it resonates at the identity level. So these are things that, I think about it like this, like, in a way, I believe that we're predisposed to be connected to certain things and drawn to certain things, to certain communities, things that light us up, things that, you know, really grab our attention. And punk and hardcore just, it resonated to me from the from very early on. I'm talking like, 10, 12 years old. I was drawn to that kind of music, that kind of energy. But in those communities, nobody's really in charge. There's no distinct leadership structure. There's no titles. It's just people building things just for the sheer love of building the thing, right? For the pure love of it, for each other, for the community, for the kids involved with it, for the bands, for the people who write fanzines, all of it. It's just shared. But certain people take a natural leadership position and they book shows, they take it upon themselves. It's a total DIY, do it yourself ethos, right? They're booking shows, they're starting bands, they're recording records, they're, getting out on the road and touring, the country or around the world, getting record deals, creating something that people care about, right? It's all done without hierarchy. So, really at the end of the day, it's about earned trust, not just claiming it or having a title to back it up, but really kind of earning trust in the space. Creating the environment where people can really bring their best and their authentic self to the environment, and then really kind of rooted in a shared purpose, right? A shared love of what it is, what we're building together. So, as I think about it in a professional sense, and the way that I think about my teams is I'm on paper, I'm the leader, right? But I am just part of this group, right? It's not, there's no hierarchy even today professionally, at least not the way that I come at, leading my teams. It's about, helping the team do the best work that they can do, and you do that by creating autonomy for them to do their best work, not structuring it so much around the org chart, so to speak, but more around just, letting people freeing the lane for people to do great work, being autonomous to go do what they think is right, and then helping to guide the path, helping to kind of steer it when people, start to veer off track a little bit. Um, and also just helping to remove roadblocks, impeding their success, right? It's not about control. It's not about uh, like I said, it's not about rank or rank and file. It's just about people doing something great together because they believe in it, and leaders sort of clearing the path for people to get after it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, you've been in leadership for quite some time, many years now. And I guess kind of, and you kind of touched on this, but what have you learned over those years and what matters more now than it did early on when it comes to leadership?
Yeah, I think the biggest evolution arc for me on that, Jim, was when I realized that I no longer had to prove myself. I think that was the biggest sort of shift to what I would consider true leadership, right? Where, early on I was ambitious and growing my career and was really working hard to prove myself. But over time I realized that, leadership is more about creating clarity, it's more about removing friction, um, and it's more about helping other people succeed. That shift for me was realizing that my output isn't the work per se, it's the team's effort, it's the team's output. That's what matters most.
Okay.
So, it's about establishing trust and clarity, keeping the team focused, um, and just creating the environment where success is as easy as possible for the people you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of environment, kind of want to touch on the Utah environment, right? The name of the podcast is Utah Growth Operators. And I mean, you've built and operate here in Utah for many years. And I guess my question to you is what makes Utah a unique place to build companies?
Yeah, I mean, man, this is such a cool question and such an cool opportunity to talk about, this community that I love. I'm not originally from Salt Lake City. My family moved here um, for work. My mom was in management at Eastern Airlines, and Eastern Airlines was one of the very first, uh, large U.S. corporations to open a call center here in Utah at a time when it was still pretty outsiders. And I'm probably dating myself a little bit with this story, but they were one of the first. So we were in Miami, Florida. Eastern decided to open a call center out here, and they were one of the first companies to realize that, Utah has sort of a natural recipe for business growth happening. And what that was a highly um, industrious workforce, uh, higher uh, nationally higher college educated, and low cost of living workforce. And so, that all led to, companies realizing this is a great place to build out the businesses. And as we evolved into more modern times, other bigger companies have followed suit, right? Uh, think about, Netflix having a presence here, Home Depot having a presence here, Facebook, Meta, et cetera, all these companies. And we could go on and into what it ended up building where, Utah and specifically northern Utah and the Wasatch Front sort of being considered and dubbed the Silicon Slopes. I think that all points back to just how uh, industrious people are here. It's a builder market here in Utah. A lot of talent, high trust culture, people willing to build, something, not just manage something, but they want to build. They've got great ideas. So, I think that's where it all stems back from. This is just, I look at even my own career and how I was fortunate enough to, start a job at Overstock.com, kind of freshly out of my undergrad and sort of out looking for an opportunity, and joined Overstock, really at a time when I needed health insurance, and they paid pretty well. They used to cover the cost of health insurance back then, and I thought this seems like a pretty good idea. And then that turned into just what it turned into there, and then a career in digital and e-commerce. And I'm just fortunate to have grown up in this area where, I had those opportunities that came to me in my career, and helped me really kind of refine and develop my builder strength over time.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the story. I didn't know you were from Miami, from Florida. I don't know. My first meeting with you was at Overstock, right? And maybe I just assumed that that you were born and raised here. I'm originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and when I came out in 2010, I was only planning on being here for a few years. I was going to give it 2, 3 years and then move on, and well, here I am, what, 15, 16 years later. I'm still here, but I've really enjoyed, the Utah community and the opportunities here, and I've found that Utah is a very supportive community when it comes to entrepreneurship and just trying to build something. Going back to that builder mentality, I found that it's interesting because it's a large community to some extent, but it's also very, very small, and it's not uncommon that you run into people, at different organizations, and there's the degree of separation is 2 to 3 at best, and so it's yeah, I've really enjoyed living here. Like I say, I was only planning on being here for a couple of years, but here I am 15, 16 years later.
Yeah, that's cool. I remember when we first met at Overstock. I remember you saying, being new from Albuquerque, and I remember you talking about, how your plan was to, be here for a minute and move on. And I think that's often the case with people. For a long time, Utah was sort of the best kept secret in a way. People didn't realize how great it was here. And I think COVID really kind of changed that as we saw a huge influx of people moving in. And, Utah continues to grow in terms of population. But people realize it's a great place to be. I mean, where else do you have access to the outdoors and so much recreation like we do here in town, but also so many smart people that want to work hard. And, it's also just good people ultimately at the end of the day. Like, this is just a good, kind culture, people that truly do want to help each other is my experience. So, I'm fortunate to have been able to make home here. Sometimes I wonder how things would be different, had I ended up growing up in Florida, not in a, it wouldn't have been a bad thing, but how would things have been different, and you realize the world is pretty small, in all aspects of things that you get involved with, whether that's professionally or your interests, you just realize that the world is a pretty small place at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, no, well said, well said. Appreciate the answer there, Sean. So, kind of want to shift gears a little bit here. So, as you know, the name of this podcast is The Execution Gap, a podcast that explores why business strategy fails and how the top 10% of leaders close that gap. My question to you, in your many years of experience, what's one execution gap that you've seen time and time again, and what advice would you give to other operators or leaders out there who may be facing a similar gap?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the gap being between strategy and prioritization. Um, at the end of the day, right? When companies fail, it's not because they didn't have a strategy. It ultimately comes down to competing priorities, right? And if everything's a priority, ultimately nothing's a priority. So, you know, uh, that shows up in, trying to take on too many initiatives, which can happen as companies start to scale. It's lack of discipline around, the opportunities. Um, sometimes discipline looks like, it's more about what you say no to versus what you say yes to, right? There's never a shortage of initiatives that you can get after. Um, not enough focus, around the initiatives you do decide to get after, and then no clear link to outcomes, right? So we talked a little bit earlier about measurement, but sometimes, and I've seen this in companies, right? You got a massive scorecard and you're measuring all kinds of metrics and KPIs, but sometimes, a KPI that looks good on a scorecard may be working against one that's more important. So that's really what it is. It's like it's that gap between, the strategy and how to prioritize. So, it comes back to discipline, right? It comes back to stripping things back to fewer priorities, ensuring that there's clear ownership and tying that all back to measurable impact.
Well, and the big thing I heard you say was saying no. I think that's the thing with it. In my experience, and I've been guilty of this, is just taking on more and more and more, right, without saying no. And I finally learned to say no, and it was one of the most powerful things that I've ever learned, to be honest with you. Not just in a professional setting, but in a personal setting as well. And there's only so much that you can do, and if you're trying to do everything mediocre rather than doing a few things, great. There's power in saying no, but it's not always easy to say that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it comes down to really doing less, but doing less better, right? And in order to do less better, you have to have clear measurements. Otherwise it can become a little murky, right? I think a lot of times companies will measure output based on or productivity based on, you know, um, someone's work output in terms of time or presence, right? This is like a large debate, it seems like in a lot of companies is like, and it's happening now with post-COVID stuff and companies trying to bring people back into the office. It's that striking that balance of, doing less and doing it better. A lot easier to kind of talk about theoretically than it is to do it in practice. And this is where a lot of companies struggle. And it's never perfect, but I think what it really comes down to is really understanding clearly what the problems are, how to measure it, helping teams feel empowered to do less, but to focus their efforts into getting really good at the things that are really gonna produce the outcomes the company needs. So, I think that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well said, well said. Well, Sean, I've really enjoyed our time together, but before we wrap up, just kind of want to ask you a personal question. And if you weren't doing the work that you do today, what alternate career would you want to try, or what alternate path would you have taken if you could go back and do it differently?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about this right now at this current time in my life, after a couple of decades in the business and really kind of thinking about what matters most to me. And honestly, it would be something creative, something in music or community building. It all really connects back to that for me. Bringing that same sort of DIY ethos into the business world. But if yeah, as I really stopped to think about it, it would be, something creative, something in community art, um, something in music. So I'd still be building something, just might be more culture focused, than you know, than you know, uh, shareholder value focused, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I kind of had a feeling there was going to be a creative music connection response to that question, but it's one of my favorite questions that I get to ask my guests because it's I think we end up in the careers that we end up in, not necessarily planning that we're going to get there. I certainly didn't plan on ending up where I ended up, but I enjoy what I do, and and I'm blessed to be able to do this. But it's always interesting to hear, what alternate paths others would have taken.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel the same way, right? We evolve into where we're going and the career we end up in is oftentimes an evolution as well. I think that's why it's important to stay kind of rooted in who we are individually at the core, what really lights up, what gets us excited, that can be applied in a lot of different disciplines. And, I feel really fortunate that, I've built the career that I have working with some of the best people and some great companies along the way. I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunities that I've had and you know, that I've been able to really kind of tap into who I am at the core level to really help some of these companies scale over time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love it, Sean, and it's been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. Really excited to have you. And but if people want to learn more about Sean McClaherty, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. It's been an honor to be on the show as well. I really appreciate it. LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, and I'm always open to connecting and having a conversation. So please reach out.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Sean, again, thanks so much for coming on Utah Growth Operators. Really, really enjoyed our time together.